intro with us like clinking glasses and like laughing. Oh man! Hey guys, hey, this is Ryan from 60 Cycle Hum, the guitar podcast,
and this is Donovan from Emoji Pedal Reviews on Instagram.
Yeah, go follow him on Instagram. It's a big hoot.
Please follow me. I need followers.
He needs those followers to pay his bills.
Yes.
He takes pictures of gear and then he reviews it with at least 3 emojis.
Yeah, sometimes more than 3, but usually just 3.
Sometimes it's a book.
Sometimes it is a book, depending on how excited I am. But emojis aren't free, so please follow me because I need more followers for more emojis.
Exactly. You got to keep that emoji train rolling. You know.
Yeah, and it's really hard.
How much are they now? Like $20 a pop now?
Yeah, and if you want Apple to make a custom one, you have to get them to take your phone call or email, and I still haven't figured out how to do that or how much that costs. So
yeah,
we're constantly working to innovate.
I mean, eventually, when you get that figured out, when you do emoji pedal review, you can just call up Apple and be like, "Hey, it's Emoji Pedal Reviews again," and they're like, "Oh yeah, hey, how are you doing?" Like, listen, I need the perfect emoji for this pedal, and they're like, "We're gonna make an emoji of that pedal." And it'll be so efficient.
Yeah, eventually if I could get to reviewing pedals with emoji of the same pedal, I really think that I'll have completely mastered this. But for now, I just have to scroll through and say, why is there not an emoji for this? And get really pissed.
Right, exactly.
Like, for a while, there wasn't a Fox emoji, and I was like, what in the heck?
How are you supposed to... yeah.
None of the Fox pedal stuff can be reviewed until there's a Fox emoji. Thank God now there is, but for a while there, it was dubious.
Is there a cow emoji?
I think there is a cow emoji.
So you can review Mutron.
Yes, if Mew wants to get at me, I would love to because we have the cow emoji ready.
Nice. It's in the budget.
It is, finally.
Well, let's talk about the reason why you're here. A couple of weeks ago, you emailed us and were like, "Hey, can I borrow your Tonal Recall, your Chase Bliss Tonal Recall?"
Yes.
And then you offered your timeline as collateral. And I was like, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. Come on over. But then my only criteria was when you bring it back, we're going to sit down and you're going to talk about each pedal and the pros and cons. Because you're thinking about selling the timeline and possibly buying a Tonal Recall.
Right.
And so you went on a little tone journey this past week to figure that out. Yeah,
I've kind of been going through a tone existential crisis. Maybe quarter life. I don't know the difference, but I've had a timeline. I've had multiple timelines. This is actually my 3rd timeline. And each time I've sold the timeline, it's usually been to get an analog delay because that is what I use 90% of the time. Gotcha. When I have my timeline on, I have a setting that I made called DMM. That's the name of it. Which I don't know. Those letters just came to me. That's kind of how I named it randomly.
Well, yeah, those don't coincide with anything. DMM.
There are no famous pedals with that acronym. No. So I'm not trying to copy anyone's sound.
Man. He's talking about a deluxe memory, man.
Yeah, I'm not trying to copy anyone else's sound, the Edge, and I'm certainly not like trying to get a particular like sound out of my timeline. I'm really inventing something new.
Yeah, so you're using it as a group of paints to color your palette.
Yeah, you know? I have a canvas that's my tone, and I use the timeline as a color palette to paint on this canvas. But the idea when I saw the Tonal Recall come out, I was like, an analog delay I haven't sold my timeline for yet. So
good point.
We better check this out. But being slightly older and wiser, I was like, well, maybe I should instead of selling my timeline to buy a Tonal Recall, maybe I should see if there's anyone local that has one that would be interested in lending it to me. Yeah, so my Tonal Recall came up, and I came over and was just like, hey, would you let me borrow it? And you said, yeah, but if you'll do a video. And I had to contact legal and make sure that the emojis would be used responsibly in this podcast and that there wouldn't be any like forced emoji labor or anything like that because obviously there are laws. The state of California has laws against
I'm going to make a bunch of emojis of children laboring scrolling down here.
We definitely didn't do that, but they'll be there on the screen.
Yes.
So
to remind you that we didn't use child labor to make this video.
The moral of the story is I have spent the last 2 weeks with the Tonal Recall trying to decide if I could use it in place of my timeline, my one timeline preset. Sometimes I use more than one and cheat. I've ventured into MIDI briefly and had a big kick out of that.
Don't we all? I mean, college is a time for experimenting. So.
Yeah, and it's all fun and games until you forget how to use said MIDI controller in the middle of practice and spending the entire practice trying to remember how to save a preset on your MIDI controller.
Mhm.
I missed a practice due to that. I mean, a friend of mine missed a practice due to that. I would
Yeah,
never
you're
do
a
that.
pro.
I'm a professional.
Yeah.
And then decided maybe I needed to take a break from MIDI and revisit like what I was using to get my sounds and how I got them. And also found out that a guitar hero of mine who owns the same pedal, the Timeline, also only uses like 3 presets on his, which if you've ever used a Timeline, they have, I think it's 170 banks, maybe 200 banks of presets.
I mean, not enough in my opinion, right?
It's actually
I mean,
100. I just remember the exact number. It's 100 banks of A or B presets.
I find myself in a 3-song worship set using at least 120 presets.
Right, which is why you need the MIDI controller
Yeah,
that's patched into Audible that will send.
I mean, there's enough
commands.
there, but I feel like it's just starting to get tight, like constrained. You know.
Well, and how
like
are
what if we do a 4-song set someday?
Right. Or I mean, if you play at my church, we do 5-song set sometimes, and it's really hard to figure out how I'm going to get all 20 presets into 5 songs and still sound the same.
Yeah.
So that is ultimately, like, especially through front of house and all of the things that you deal with being a guitar player, you want to make sure that you always sound the same and get to use the max amount of stuff.
Exactly. That's why I stack 5 or 6 drives, is so that I can make sure each song I sound the same.
Right. And I just use an incremental, like, 1 spring reverb till I get 5, a full tank of 5. So with the Timeline and the Tonal Recall, I'm kind of trying to simplify my rig.
People aren't going to be able to tell the difference between our jokes and our truth.
Right. That's the best. That's the best part. I'm going to say I actually quit playing guitar, and somebody will think that that's serious.
Yeah.
Through this quest.
Yeah, we're talking about just using the Timeline by itself as the instrument, right?
Yes, I actually put all of my guitars on reverb and sold them while I had the Tonal Recall, so I could make sure that I singled out exactly what I wanted from each delay.
Only using the delays.
Yeah.
You don't want to color your tone with the guitar.
Not with the guitar.
Yeah.
No. So I.
This is why I made you do this. This is why I made you come on the show.
Yep.
I know there'd be some premium jokes in here.
They're fantastic. The content, the room's full of content.
Yes.
Like literally, I look around and all I can see is content, and it's great. And the fact that it's going to be on YouTube is really bringing me a lot of joy. So, Ryan, if it's okay, maybe we could just talk about each pedal.
Yeah, let's do that.
So I'll start with the Timeline because it's been around the longest, and most people are probably the most familiar with it.
It's a classic at this point.
I hold one in my hand.
This is a workhorse for a lot of guitarists.
Yeah, almost.
Seriously, I'm not joking at this point.
Yeah,
it is.
To be serious for just a minute, if we can last that long, it is the industry standard, I think, for most working guitarists, both in the P and dub circle, which I am in, and the non-P and dub circle.
People who really want to dive into the deep end with delay, this is on the top of the list, for sure.
And Strymon has a reputation for what they do. They're very well known, and it's because they do such a great job with their pedals. They're expensive, but you get so much out of it.
I mean, what isn't expensive these days?
Right. I mean, it's...
Whenever you watch this.
I mean, the Scotch, how expensive was this? Very. So
$17 at Costco.
Okay, maybe not everything's expensive. So the thing about it has a debucket algorithm, which in the clips that you may have heard, I'm only using the debucket algorithm. I didn't use any of the other ones. It has, I think, a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 algorithms that you can use with multiple menus and settings buried within. I mean, if you wanted to go on a desert island and bring one pedal, you could, in theory, bring this one and not run out of algorithms to play with and settings to tinker for probably a couple of days.
Yeah.
Maybe even a year. I don't know.
I mean, if a pro demo guy like me, like a day and a half, I'd probably get pretty tired of it, be ready for something new.
And for someone that only uses one preset, I would probably still be using that preset.
No, it's like I look at something like that and it's completely daunting to me, the amount of options available and the amount of twinking that people can do.
Right.
I think I said twinking. I meant tweaking.
Twanking. Yeah. The great thing about it, too, is there's additional stuff that it buried in here. You have a looper. You can run an effects loop. It obviously has the MIDI control. And so there's really a lot of ways that you can use this pedal in your pedal board, even if you don't just need a ton of delays. If you need a looper, you have a looper. There's actually some reverb presets in here. So if you don't have a reverb pedal, you can use Springy and which is the name of their reverb preset. And it sounds great. It sounds like a good reverb. You can set it up as a chorus, which you can do with some delay pedals with modulation.
Take a look at this thing.
But it is a lot, and the menus are very dense, and it does require some pre-configuration.
It's got a duck setting if you want a real quack.
If you have a Stratocaster and you want to put it in that 2 or 4 position and magnify that with a duck reverb or duck delay,
real quick,
it would get extremely cracky, like the Affleck duck. Almost.
Just like the Affleck duck.
Yeah,
it's really just a sample of the Affleck duck.
When you just strum anything.
Okay, no more jokes.
Yeah, we're trying to be serious.
Serious business here. Serious business.
So I decided to put this on Ryan's pedal shelf for the last 2 weeks, and
that's your collateral, because I didn't have a power supply to even use it.
Sucker, got him. Yeah, so I put it on the pedal shelf and took this guy home, which, as you can see, has a very bright LCD display right here that always says Tonal Recall. You can't change that. There's nothing in the configuration that changes the LCD display.
High technology.
I'm just kidding. This is not an LCD display. It's just really shiny.
You fooled me.
Metal. Fooled me for the first week. I was like, how do you edit what it says?
How do I turn it off?
How do I rename the preset?
I unplug it, and
I tapped all of the buttons, tried to go through all the menus, and unfortunately, it just wasn't there.
Yeah, this is a weird joke.
Yeah, sorry. I'll apologize for that one. So basically, I took the Tonal Recall home, put it on my pedal board, and flipped it into dotted eighth, cranked the mix in the region, and set the depth and rate of the modulation, and tried to get my signature, to me only, sound.
What you call your DMM sound.
Right. It's a proprietary and trademarked term. And I turned it on and immediately was blown away by how good it sounded, because the Tonal Recall is all analog. It is digital brain, analog heart, and the heart that beats within it is definitely all analog, powered by 2 super specific chips that Joel hand selects with his tender love and care, and puts in each pedal.
I've shook his hand. He's got good hands.
He does, and it's from selecting all of the chips and putting them in.
That chip conditioner.
He is a chip conditioner. And I started messing with it, and I started realizing that it sits really well in a mix when I'm playing at home and practicing and rehearsing, and just sounds beautiful. Super lush. The modulation is fantastic. It's everything that I thought it would be. And then I played it live. And so I had a gig last weekend at a large church in the San Diego area that's actually closer to Mexico than it is to San Diego. And and I sat it, I set it and kind of forget it, because I only use typically one sound, and obviously tapped in the tempo, and I started having to crank the mix higher and higher as I was playing with it, because I was having a hard time really getting the repeats to stand out. And
interesting.
Typically, I set the tone on it all the way cranked to the right-hand side, which is supposed to be the brightest that it can be. And because it's an analog delay, it sounded like analog delay, and didn't stand out like a digital analog delay would sound.
Well, yeah, the analog delay is famous for losing resolution with each repeat.
Exactly.
It gets darker and darker.
And since I typically run the regen pretty high because I want something really washy for the type of music that I play, you're also kind of hurting yourself, I think, there a little bit, or at least I was, with how I was setting the pedal. But when I would practice with it and play it at home by myself, I would find myself turning the tone knob down, doing some different things with the mix and the regen. Like if I was just soloing and wanted something to layer over my solo, I would turn the regen and the mix like all the way down to half to just kind of wash underneath what I was doing. But in a live situation, I was finding that wasn't quite
interesting.
Wasn't quite the case.
So it was just, it couldn't come out of the mix is the problem you were having.
Yeah, and I typically play, so to give you some insight about my rig, I play a Strat through a fairly bright, but not like chimey-ish amp. It's a Benson Monarch, which has a good way of sitting in a mix well, especially a full band mix. And my delays, you know, when I use them, it's for a part that probably has a ton of digital delays on top of it and reverb and stuff. And so you really need it to cut for the type of stuff that I do or am asked to do most of the time. So what I found basically, to kind of wrap it all and bring it all to a head, is that the Tonal Recall sounded awesome in my living room when I was practicing through my stuff, especially running it stereo through my reverb pedal, or just running it mono. It sounded fantastic no matter what setting I set it to, no matter how weird I got with the modulation. Sounded great. And then when I would go to a gig, I'd be like, oh, I wish the tone knob went just a little bit further to the right, got a little bit brighter, a little bit more digital. And
A little more digital, huh?
And I was like, that's not actually what this is supposed to do.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it sounds like you could have used the mix going a little higher too, maybe.
Yeah, I experimented with the mix, and at a certain point on it, so after probably about 9 o'clock on the mix, you tend to go where the repeats actually are louder than the guitar, which kind of gets a little weird. There's a weird spot on it. Maybe not weird. I'm sure it's cranked pretty high, higher than you would probably normally use it. And this is also dealing with front of house and going through in-ear monitors and stuff and having how it's mixed in my ears. But the mix would, once I got to that point where the repeats were louder than my dry signal, then I was like, oh, I got to turn it back down because it's kind of hard to play when you're bouncing
taking over.
Yeah. When I could hear the repeats before So it was a little tricky, and but still sounded great, and I got no complaints. I actually played at my church, and a good friend, Sean Hutchinson, was doing sound, who's a friend that plays guitar and is familiar with pedals. And I asked him.
Sean did the setup on this guitar over here.
Yeah, he's a great guitar repair guy and setup guy in the San Diego area at Hutchinson's. And I asked him, hey, could you tell that I was not using a timeline, that I was using something else? He was like, nope.
Yeah.
Had no clue. So the moral of the story there, I think, which I was actually surprised, is like, I can't believe I didn't, like, you mean I sounded the same? How is that possible?
Yeah, I've noticed every little detail is completely different.
It was so different. Couldn't you tell the repeats were darker and more analog and more lush? And wasn't there the vibrato? Wasn't it just so vibey?
Couldn't you tell that there were 10 repeats instead of 11?
I was actually using quarter and not dotted eighth. Didn't you know? Answer was no. Front of house, they couldn't tell through front of house, and even a pretty well-trained listening ear was not able to determine the difference, which put me at ease a little bit, I'll be honest with you, because, you would hope that your tone would never be so noticeable as to be like, oh, that was actually bad.
You shouldn't be in the mix so much, especially in that sort of situation where people really actually notice.
Yes.
Your delay repeats that much.
Yeah. There was
if the audience can tell like what style of delay you're using in a praise and worship setting, you're probably way too loud in the mix.
Yeah, and you're probably not going to get very many P&W gigs after that.
Not to say it doesn't matter. It matters to the player. It's all about, it's about having fun and being interested in your rig and, kind of experimenting. And it's, a lot of these praise and worship gigs, they don't pay. So the payment in a lot of ways is your own entertainment.
And being in the tone zone.
Being in the tone zone. Having an excuse to spend your allowance on shiny things.
Right.
Playing is its own reward as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of my favorite, to piggyback on what you were saying about guitarists sitting in the mix, when I was on Gear Talk P&W once, there was a thread about James Duke, who's everyone's favorite guitar player in the P&W circle.
Yeah.
And he is a good guitar player. He's a great guitar player. But the quote, the guy posted something, it's just like, oh, I love James Duke so much. Like, you can't ever really hear him, but you know that he's there. And I just thought it was the best way to sum up what we do as praise and worship guitarists.
Yeah.
You'll never notice the whale sounds until they're not there.
We wake up at 5 a.m. to get to church at 6:30 to play 6 songs if we're lucky. And eat donuts.
Yes. And the congregation may not know that we're there. And the front of house will probably give us a little bump for that one part that the keys is also playing. Yeah. Or the track's also playing.
So how does the timeline stack up? I mean, we covered that a little bit, but for your one setting, what is, for your main setting here, how do you think it stacks up against the Tonal Recall?
The thing about it is, so I came in and sat down and plugged both of them in, and without really spending any time tweaking the knobs, I hit my DMM, my proprietary DMM setting on the timeline, and just let it rip, and then switched over to the Tonal Recall. And the result was actually fairly favorable. I had gone back and forth many times over the last 2 weeks deciding what I would do, because I can certainly see how this could be my only delay pedal very easily. But I also know that there are some other things about this that are, aside from the sound, that kind of make me want to keep it. Some of it's familiarity, like having had one for a long time. Some of it's the looper and this ability to run stereo and the other delay algorithms that I will probably never use, but have. And so when I plugged it in and just let it rip on a few of my favorite riffs that are very delay centric. I was actually pretty pleasantly surprised by how well the timeline did. Because there are those that will say, well, it kind of sounds really digital, and you can really tell that it's a digital simulation of something. And I kind of had that in the back of my head while I was making this decision. But it is actually pretty dang close. And I'm sure if I had spent some more time playing with the filter knob and the grit control, I could have gotten some very similar sounds. The only place that I can't get the similar sounds, and where Joel has absolutely nailed it with this pedal, is the modulation.
The modulation section on the Tonal Recall is bananas. It's really crazy.
And I didn't really get to ramp too much. I always forget how to ramp. And I have a womb tone as well, and I do the same thing there. Like, I'll set up a ramp control and forget to save it as a preset, but love exactly what it's doing. But it's so, like, once you find a good spot on the ramp knobs, you kind of like need to not move until you're done playing with it, because you may forget how you got there, which is what happens to me every single time. But the modulation is just unbeatable on this pedal. Whether you want something very subtle, something that warbles, something that gets really out of control, there's so many options, especially with the square wave and the triangle wave, which the triangle wound up being my favorite while I had it.
The triangle's a lot of fun.
Just make it special. Another thing that the Tonal Recall definitely does better is the hold function. If you don't know, you can hold down the preset that you're on the timeline and get it to do something. In some cases, it's just infinite repeats. In some cases, like on the analog debucket setting, it does the feedback the same way that the Tonal Recall does. I say the same way, meaning that they're trying to accomplish the same thing. The Tonal Recall definitely gets there faster in terms of doing oscillation, and it's actually way more fun to mess with because you can hit the tempo switches once it's gone to oscillation and get the weird spaceship sounds that your bandmates love when you're doing in rehearsal.
Right.
Yeah, so the hold function on this timeline doesn't even come close to what you can do with the Tonal Recall and the oscillation. I found just getting the regen is very, very functional on this pedal when you get close to oscillation, because it will get on the verge, it'll get right about, and then if you want to, you can get it to go all the way and set it to the longest setting and have it just totally oscillate. But because it's all analog, it does a really nice job of picking up on your dynamics, knowing when you're strumming hard and going into full oscillation mode, knowing when you're playing really light and going into like a lighter almost version that the timeline just isn't smart enough to figure out. Which is just super, super nice if you're doing something ambient or you want to do something kind of crazy, a little bit edgier than maybe your worship pastor or band leader will want.
If you want to make the lady in the third row fan herself,
you definitely want this pedal. Let me just tell you, absolutely. Whoa. I don't know what you were doing because I couldn't really hear it, but it was there.
Yeah, I couldn't hear it at all, but I could feel it.
That didn't sound the same.
So I don't know if you said it outright yet, but what is your final plan here? Which one are you keeping? Which one are you going to buy?
My final plan, for right now at least, because we're all guitar players here watching this, we know that
this is a safe space.
Yeah, tomorrow I could completely change my mind, or something new will come out, like the Empress Echo Station. But I'm going to hold on to the timeline.
Gotcha.
I think it's the most familiar for me, and hearing it head to head and knowing that it gets close enough to the Tonal Recall means that I probably just will keep around the extra 199 presets that are available, even if I just use the one.
Yeah, for your 6-song set.
For my 6-song set, and the off chance that I ever have to play a 7-song set and need something completely different, the ice feature, or the reverse, or a weird trim or filter delay that I would probably not use even then. But the fact that you have it is really nice. That's why I have 2 fuzz pedals on my board, and
of course,
I mean, you never know what texture you're gonna need to nail that part. The one time you get to turn on your fuzz pedal, so I'm gonna hold on to the timeline. At some point, I'd love to add a Tonal Recall and have both, because there's some settings on here when you don't have to set it in dotted eighth mode. You actually get, I think, a little bit more out of it.
Yeah.
Because it will wash into whatever else you have.
I mean, I didn't get to play around with that with the timeline, but to say my piece on the Tonal Recall, this isn't like any other delay that I've ever messed with. I know it can hit some sounds that are kind of like your proprietary DMM sound. But this thing just goes in weird places. If you like to make weird noises, if you like to do crazy weird stuff, like this guy will get you there. As far as like the mix go, I was feeling you on that. I've had a little bit of trouble getting the mix dialed in the way I would normally like in live scenarios. But then I'll go back and listen to a recording or something like that and be like, it sounded fine. Like, what is it? What is the weird little thing that's happening this in a live mix in my in-ears or in the monitor mix that isn't getting translated into what's actually happening? So there's a little bit of weird voodoo in this thing. It's definitely a pedal you want to spend a lot of time with, like getting it figured out, dialing it in. There's a lot of settings on this thing. There's this whole bank of controls back here for all the ramp and expression settings and stuff. Like this is smaller than that, but I'd say, you know, my cursory judgment here, this is like a programmer's delight. All the presets you ever want. This is, I mean, you can do MIDI presets with these things too. And there's 2 built-in presets that you can pull up anytime you want. But this is like an experimental person's like analog only delight. You know, this thing is going to get you weird places. It's going to sound like the craziest analog delay pedal ever.
Absolutely.
So, and you know, when I first demoed this, I was getting all kinds of questions from people like, oh, does it kill this pedal? Does it kill that pedal? Does it sound like this or that? Like, I don't know. It sounds like itself. Like it's its own thing, kind of.
Yeah, I can absolutely agree with that because I've had a lot of the pedals that attempt to make my signature sound, the DMM sound, and have traded or sold my timeline for them on multiple occasions, and can definitely say that it does not sound. It's not a recreation of another pedal. It is something entirely its own. And to me, I think it's great. I love it for that reason.
But I think if you're looking to purchase one of these, you have to look at it that direction. Don't buy one of these if you're trying to get his DMM sound.
Yeah, if you're trying to sound like Donovan, you really should probably buy a timeline and you ask me for my settings. And I might sell it to you. I might sell you my preset. You never know.
Recoup those emoji costs.
Yeah, I mean, who knows? Everything's for sale, right?
Absolutely. In Trump's America.
Yeah.
So it just got political.
Oh, no. I'm triggered.
I just dated this too. Like,
oh man!
In 20 years, when we're living in a Mad Max reality,
I can't even.
I keep bringing up Mad Max reality and different things that we do for the show.
I did have a bit I thought of on my way.
Lay it
over
on
here.
me, man.
I just wanted to use it. In the case of the timeline versus the tonal recall, my analog heart says yes, but my digital brain says no.
Solid bit.
Thanks. I was really proud of that in the car. I was like, I need to remember that. Don't forget. Digital heart. Don't screw it up either.
Yeah. Don't mix it up. All right. Thanks for coming on the camera with me.
Absolutely. Always
coming on the show.
Yeah.
Coming on the camera sounds funny.
Yeah.
All right.
I just got it.
Later, guys.